I will defend him. That single scream tore through the heavy silence of the federal courtroom, shattering the decorum of the most high-profile trial in New York City history. The judge froze his gavel, hovering in mid-air. The jury gasped. And Julian Thorne, the billionaire tech mogul who had just been left for dead by the only person he trusted, turned around in his chair. He did not see a high-powered attorney in a $3,000 suit. He saw me, his maid, wearing a faded uniform and clutching a binder full of secrets that were about to burn his enemies to the ground. But before I tell you how a housekeeper outsmarted the entire legal system, you have to understand the moment that broke him. The air inside the Manhattan Federal Courthouse was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of stale coffee, old wood, and the nervous sweat of a man about to lose everything. Julian Thorne sat at the defense table, his usually immaculate posture slumped. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The charges were heavy: embezzlement, fraud, $50 million missing from a charity fund for children with cancer. The press was calling him a monster. The public wanted his head on a spike. But Julian was calm. He was calm because he had Vanessa Sterling sitting beside him. Vanessa was not just his fiancée. She was his lead counsel, a shark in stilettos with a smile that could freeze water. She had promised him this was all a misunderstanding. She had promised to bury the prosecution. Julian looked at her, his eyes full of that blind trust that only men in love seem to possess. He reached for her hand under the table, needing reassurance. Vanessa pulled her hand away as if she had touched a hot stove. That was the first sign. The judge cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Ms. Sterling, are you ready to present the opening statement for the defense?" The room went silent. Hundreds of cameras were trained on the back of Vanessa's perfect blonde head. She stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her navy skirt suit. She did not look at the jury. She did not look at the judge. She turned and looked directly at Julian. Her eyes were not filled with love. They were dead, cold, empty. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and loud enough for the microphones to catch every syllable. "I cannot proceed." The judge frowned. "Excuse me, counsel. I am withdrawing from this case," Vanessa announced. A ripple of shock went through the gallery. Reporters started whispering furiously. Julian looked up at her, confusion twisting his face. "Vanessa, what are you doing?" She ignored him. She turned to the cameras, playing to the audience she knew was watching at home. "I have discovered evidence that makes it impossible for me to continue. As an officer of the court and as a woman of conscience, I cannot defend a man who steals from dying children. It goes against my moral code. It goes against everything I stand for." The lie was so smooth it almost sounded like the truth. Julian stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Vanessa, that is a lie. You know the truth. You drafted the contracts." She didn't let him finish. With a look of pure disgust, she grabbed the heavy stack of case files in front of her, the evidence that was supposed to save him. She lifted them high and threw them. They slammed into Julian's chest papers, exploding into the air like white confetti at a funeral. Then she ripped the microphone off her lapel and tossed it onto the table. It made a screeching feedback noise that made everyone wince. "I am done," she spat at him. "Good luck, Julian. You are going to need it." She turned on her heel and walked out. She didn't look back. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight into the arms of the waiting press, ready to play the hero who walked away from the villain. Julian stood there, covered in the scattered papers of his own defense, completely and utterly alone. The silence that followed was terrifying. He was a man drowning in plain sight, and the person who was supposed to be his lifeline had just tied an anchor around his neck. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. Bam, bam, bam. It echoed through the courtroom, vibrating in Julian's chest. Judge Holloway was not a man known for his patience. His face was red, his veins bulging against his stiff white collar. "Order. Order in this court." He shouted, but the room was already too far gone. The gallery was a sea of angry faces, a mob that had smelled blood. They were not there for justice. They were there for a sacrifice. Julian stood up, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the mahogany defense table. Your Honor, please. You saw what just happened. She abandoned me. I need a continuance. I need time to find new counsel. His voice cracked. The arrogance that usually defined Julian Thorne was gone, replaced by the raw, unfiltered panic of a man watching his life disintegrate. The judge leaned over the bench, his eyes narrowing into slits. Mr. Thorne, this trial has been on the docket for 18 months. You are accused of defrauding a children's cancer charity of $50 million. This is a federal crime. We do not do continuances because your girlfriend decided to grow a conscience at the 11th hour. You have exactly 1 minute to produce representation, or I am revoking your bail. You will be remanded to custody immediately until a public defender can be assigned. Do you understand me? Remanded to custody. Jail. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He turned to look behind him, searching for a friendly face. A partner. A friend. Someone from his board of directors. Anyone who could make a call. But the rows behind him were filled with wolves. A man in the second row stood up. He was wearing a t-shirt with the face of a bald child on it. "You stole from my daughter!" he screamed. His voice was raw, filled with pain that cut through the noise. "You bought a yacht while my baby died." Suddenly, a plastic water bottle flew through the air. It smacked against the bulletproof glass partition separating the defendant from the gallery with a dull thud. Then another object hit the glass. A pen. A notebook. The bailiffs rushed forward, their hands on their holsters, shouting commands. Sit down, or you will be removed." The crowd did not care. They booed, they hissed, they chanted his name like a curse. Julian shrank back, pressing himself against the table. For the first time in his life, his money could not protect him. His influence meant nothing. He looked at the prosecutor's table. The opposing team was smiling, shuffling their papers, already counting the conviction. They looked at him like he was a dead man walking. He looked at the court sketch artist who was furiously drawing his terrified expression. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. The walls were closing in. The air felt thin. The judge raised his gavel again, ready to seal his fate. Ready to send the billionaire to a cage where he would be eaten alive. Julian closed his eyes, waiting for the sound of the metal cuffs. He had no moves left. The game was over. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a crash that made half the gallery jump. All heads turned. A woman was running down the center aisle. She was not wearing a suit. She was not wearing the polished heels of a corporate attorney. She was wearing a gray housekeeping uniform that was slightly too big for her frame. A white apron was tied tightly around her waist, and there was a smudge of gray dust on her left cheek. Her hair was pulling loose from a messy bun, and she was out of breath, her chest heaving as she sprinted toward the bench. "I object," she screamed. The words ricocheted off the high ceilings, raw and desperate. "I object, Your Honor. He did not do it." The silence that followed was different from the terrifying silence of moments before. It was confused. It was the silence of a room trying to process a glitch in reality. Then it broke. A low ripple of laughter started in the back row and spread forward like a wave. It was cruel laughter, mocking laughter, the kind of laughter that strips a person of their dignity in seconds. The reporters lowered their cameras, exchanging amused glances. This was the final nail in the coffin of Julian Thorne's reputation. A farce. The judge lowered his gavel, slowly peering over his spectacles with a look of supreme annoyance. He looked like he had just seen a stray dog wander into a cathedral. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice dripping with incredulity. "This is a federal courtroom, young woman, not a service entrance. You are disrupting legal proceedings. Bailiff, remove her." Brianna did not stop. She pushed past the wooden swinging gate that separated the public from the court. She stood right next to the defense table, just a few feet from Julian. She smelled like lemon polish and sweat, a sharp contrast to the expensive cologne and old leather that permeated the room. Julian looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. "Brianna, what are you doing here? Get out! Go home! You cannot be here!" "I am not going anywhere," she said. Her voice was shaking. Her hands were trembling by her sides, but her chin was held high. "I am here to represent the defendant." The laughter grew louder. It was a roar now. The jury members were covering their mouths to hide their smiles. The bailiffs were stepping forward, reaching for their handcuffs, ready to drag her out. This was a circus, and she was the main attraction. The prosecutor stood up slowly. He was a tall man with a shark-like grin and a suit that cost more than Brianna made in a year. He looked her up and down, letting his gaze linger on the dust smear on her cheek and the fraying hem of her uniform. He walked over to her, invading her personal space, playing to the crowd. "Well, this is a first," he said, his voice smooth and venomous. He reached out and flicked the edge of her dirty apron with one manicured finger. "Tell me, miss, are you planning to clean up the evidence with this apron? Or are you just here to empty the trash cans before we send your boss to prison?" The gallery erupted. Even the judge cracked a smile. It was a humiliation ritual. They wanted her to shrink. They wanted her to cry and run back to the shadows where the help belonged. But Brianna did not shrink. She stood her ground, her eyes locking onto the prosecutor's face. She slapped his hand away from her apron. The sound was sharp and loud. The laughter died instantly. "I am not here to clean," she said, her voice dropping to a register of cold steel that no one expected from a woman in a uniform. "I am here because I am the only person in this room who knows how to read a balance sheet without lying about the numbers. And I am here to tell you that you are about to put an innocent man in jail while the real thief is currently sitting in first class on a flight to the Cayman Islands." The room went deadly quiet. The prosecutor took a step back, his smile faltering. Brianna reached into the deep pocket of her apron. She did not pull out a rag. She pulled out a thick leather-bound folder. She slammed it onto the defense table. Dust motes danced in the air around it. "I have the logs," she said, looking straight at the judge. "I have the timestamps. And I suggest you look at them before you bang that gavel again." Julian Thorne stared at the leather folder sitting on the defense table. It was thick, it was heavy, and it was covered in the same gray dust that smeared Brianna's cheek. He looked from the folder to the woman who had slammed it down. For a second, his mind went blank. This was the woman who folded his socks. This was the woman who scrubbed the coffee stains off his granite countertops. This was the help. And now she was standing in federal court screaming at a judge on his behalf. The humiliation hit him harder than the charges. It washed over him like ice water. He felt the eyes of the reporters burning into his back. He could practically hear the headlines being written. "Billionaire defended by Maid." It was a joke. A sick, twisted joke. And he was the punchline. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Julian hissed. His voice was low, but it vibrated with a rage that made the veins in his neck bulge. "Get out of here. Right now. Go back to the house." Brianna did not move. She looked him dead in the eye. Her hands were still resting on the folder. "I am trying to save your life, Mr. Thorne. I do not need you to save me." He snapped. He stood up, towering over her. He used his height, his presence, the sheer force of his personality that usually made boardrooms tremble. But Brianna did not flinch. "You are embarrassing me. Do you understand that? You are making this worse. Look at you. You are wearing a uniform. You smell like cleaning fluid. Do you think anyone in this room is going to take you seriously? Do you think I am going to let my life be decided by someone who does not even have a law degree?" He turned away from her, disgusted. He looked up at the judge, his face twisting into a mask of desperate arrogance. "Your Honor, please. I do not know what this woman is doing here. She is domestic staff. She is confused. Please have her removed immediately so I can contact proper counsel." The gallery murmured. The sketch artist was working furiously, capturing the sneer on Julian's face. He wanted to distance himself from her. He wanted to show them that he was still Julian Thorne, that he still had standards, that he would rather go to jail with dignity than be saved by a servant. "You are fired," Julian shouted at her, spinning back around. Do you hear me, Brianna? You are fired. Get out of my sight. He expected her to cry. He expected her to grab her apron and run out the door just like she would have if he had yelled at her in his kitchen. But she didn't. She just looked at him with a strange expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was pity. And that made him hate her even more. Mr. Thorne. The judge's voice boomed from the bench, cutting through Julian's tirade. You are currently without counsel. Your previous attorney has fled the jurisdiction. You are facing immediate remand to a federal detention center. Unless you have another lawyer hiding in your pocket, this woman is the only person standing between you and a cell. I would rather rot in a cell than turn this trial into a mockery. Julian spat. He glared at Brianna, his eyes cold and hard. Go home, Brianna. Clean the floors. That is what I pay you for. Leave the thinking to the people who actually went to school. The cruelty of his words hung in the air. It was a silence so heavy it felt physical. He wanted to hurt her. He wanted to make her feel as small as he felt right now. He wanted to push her away before she could see him break. But Brianna just took a deep breath. She reached for the folder and opened it. She did not look at him. She looked at the judge. He is upset, Your Honor. She said, her voice calm, steady, and clear. He is in shock, but I am not leaving, and neither is he. Not until you see what is in this file. The insults hung in the air like toxic smoke. Julian turned his back to her, his shoulders heaving with the effort of maintaining his composure. He expected the sound of retreating footsteps. He expected the squeak of rubber soles on marble as the maid ran away to cry in the hallway. That was what people did when he dismissed them. They left. But he did not hear footsteps. He heard the rustle of paper. He heard a sharp intake of breath. Brianna took one step forward, then another. She walked right up to the low wooden partition that separated the defendant from the rest of the room. She leaned over the railing. Her face was inches from the back of his head. There was a microphone positioned right there on the defense table, a small black gooseneck that was currently live and feeding into the court recorder system. You can fire me later, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was projected perfectly. It cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a laser beam. But right now, you are going to listen to me. Vanessa did not go to the children's hospital this morning. She lied to you. Julian froze. His hand was halfway to his face to wipe away a bead of sweat, but it stopped in midair. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. What did you say to me? She told you she was at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new oncology wing. Brianna continued, her eyes locking onto his. She spoke with a terrifying precision. That is why she left the penthouse at 7. She said she had to do a press walkthrough. But the ribbon cutting is not until next Tuesday. I know because I ironed the invitation 2 days ago and put it on your dresser. Julian felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He opened his mouth to argue, to tell her she was mistaken, but she cut him off. She leaned closer to the microphone. At 9 o'clock this morning, she was not holding giant scissors, Julian. She was authorizing a wire transfer. $50 million. Destination Cayman Islands. Account number ending in 449. The courtroom went dead silent. The stenographer stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys. The prosecutor, who had been smirking and whispering to his assistant, suddenly looked very pale. The microphone had caught every single word. It was not just a whisper between a boss and his maid anymore. It was a declaration. How do you know that? Julian whispered. His voice was hoarse. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. Because she left her iPad on the kitchen island, Brianna replied. She forgot to turn off the cloud sync notifications. I was wiping down the granite when the banner popped up. Transfer complete, 9:03 a.m., confirmed by V. Sterling. She looked at the judge, then back at Julian. She is not having a crisis of conscience, sir. She is cashing out. Julian stared at her. For a moment the world stopped spinning. He looked at the woman in the gray uniform. The woman he had just insulted, the woman whose name he barely remembered until today. And he saw something he had missed for 3 years. He saw intelligence. He saw a mind that paid attention to the details he was too busy to notice. The puzzle pieces slammed together in his mind. Vanessa's sudden withdrawal, the missing funds, the timing, it all fit. And the only person who had seen it was standing right in front of him holding a dust-covered binder like a shield. The prosecutor slammed his hand on the table, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay. This is inadmissible. This woman is a domestic worker, not an officer of the court. She is introducing unverified claims based on a notification she claims to have seen on a kitchen appliance. This is a circus, and I move to have her removed immediately so we can proceed with sentencing." Brianna did not flinch. She turned her gaze from Julian to the prosecutor, her eyes sharp and cold. "It is not hearsay under the Federal Rules of Evidence Rule 803. She said, her voice cutting through the prosecutor's bluster like a knife. "It qualifies as a present-sense impression and an excited utterance. Furthermore, under Brady v. Maryland, the prosecution has a duty to examine exculpatory evidence even if it comes from a source you deem unworthy. I attended Columbia Law School for 2 years on a merit scholarship before I was forced to withdraw. I know the rules of this court better than you think." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The judge peered over his glasses, looking at Brianna with a new expression. It was no longer annoyance. It was curiosity. "You went to Columbia Law?" the judge asked. "Top 10% of my class." "Your Honor," Brianna replied, her voice steady. "I am not asking to represent Mr. Thorne as his attorney. I know I am not licensed. I am asking to be recognized as a temporary legal assistant for the purpose of preserving evidence. The defendant has been abandoned by his counsel in the middle of a federal trial. He has been defrauded by the very person sworn to protect him. To deny him 24 hours to secure this evidence would be a violation of his Sixth Amendment rights." Julian stared at her. He looked at the grease stain on her apron, then at the fire in her eyes. He had seen her every day for 3 years, and he had never really seen her until this moment. She was quoting case law while wearing a uniform he paid for. The judge leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. He looked at the furious prosecutor, then at the empty chair where Vanessa Sterling should have been. He looked at Julian, who was still pale and shaking. "This is highly irregular," the judge said slowly. "But the accusation of counsel fleeing with stolen funds is too serious to ignore. If what this woman says is true, this trial has been compromised from the start." He banged the gavel once. "I am granting a 24-hour continuance. The court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mr. Thorne, you are to return to your residence immediately. You will be placed under house arrest with electronic monitoring. If you step 1 foot off your property, your bail is revoked permanently. And you, Miss Davis." Brianna straightened her spine. "Yes, Your Honor. You have 24 hours to produce this evidence. If you are wasting my time, or if this is some ploy to buy time for a flight risk, I will hold you in contempt of court. Do you understand?" "I understand," Brianna said. The judge stood up. "Court is adjourned." The bailiffs moved in immediately. They grabbed Julian by the arms, not roughly, but with firm, unyielding pressure. They began to march him toward the side exit where the ankle monitors were fitted. He looked back over his shoulder. He wasn't looking for his partners or the press. He was looking for Brianna. She was standing alone at the defense table, clutching the dusty binder to her chest. The press was already screaming questions at her, but she didn't answer. She just watched Julian being led away, her expression unreadable. They were bound together now, the billionaire and the maid. And the clock was ticking. The elevator doors hissed open, revealing the panoramic view of the city that Julian Thorne once ruled. Now it looked like a prison yard made of steel and glass. He stormed into the living room, tearing the silk tie from his neck as if it were a noose. The silence of the penthouse was deafening. It mocked him. It reminded him that he was trapped, a prisoner in his own castle. He looked at the sleek chrome speakers standing like sentinels in the corner. Custom made, imported, worth more than most people earned in a decade. He grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar. With a primal roar, he hurled it. The crystal smashed into the electronics with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. Sparks flew. The silence shattered. He didn't stop there. He grabbed a lamp and threw it against the wall. He kicked the coffee table, sending art books sliding across the floor. He wanted to destroy everything that reminded him of the life he had just lost. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, when he heard the soft click of the service door. Brianna walked in. She was still wearing that gray uniform. In her hands she held a silver tray with a sandwich and a glass of water. The sight of it made his blood boil. Domesticity. Servitude. It was all a lie. He spun around, pointing a shaking finger at her. You did this. You are working with her, aren't you? How much did she pay you to stage that little scene in the courtroom? How much did Vanessa give you to make me look like a fool in front of the press? Brianna stopped moving. She held the tray steady, her eyes wide but dry. I am not a spy, Mr. Thorne. I am the person who just bought you 24 hours of freedom. Freedom! He laughed, a harsh barking sound. You call this freedom? I am wearing a tracking device like a common criminal. And I have a maid quoting statutes at a federal judge. Do you have any idea how humiliation feels, Brianna? Do you know what it feels like to have the entire world laugh at you because your cleaning lady thinks she is a lawyer? He walked toward her, closing the distance until he was looming over her. He wanted to scare her. He wanted her to break so he wouldn't have to. You are not a savior. You are a spy. You have been digging through my trash, monitoring my notifications. You are obsessed. You planned this whole thing to get your 15 minutes of fame. You wanted to see the billionaire beg, didn't you? I brought you dinner, she said softly. Her calmness was gasoline on his fire. He looked at the sandwich. It looked pathetic. Just like him. I do not want your charity, he screamed. He swung his arm out in a violent arc. His hand connected with the silver edge of the tray. It flew from her grasp. The glass shattered against the marble floor. Water and bread scattered across the pristine white rug. It was a mess. A perfect, ugly mess. Just like his life. Get out! He roared. Get out before I throw you out myself. Do not come back until you remember your place. Brianna looked down at the shattered glass and the wet bread soaking into the expensive white rug. She did not bend down. She did not rush to the kitchen for a towel. For the first time in 3 years, she stepped over the mess instead of cleaning it up. She walked through the debris, her heavy work boots crunching on the shards of crystal. She stopped inches from Julian. He was panting, his face red with exertion and rage, but he took a step back when he saw the look in her eyes. It was not the look of a servant. It was the look of an equal. I am not cleaning that up, she said. Her voice was low and dangerous. And I am not a spy. I am a survivor. You think you know me, Julian. You think because I wear a gray dress and say yes, sir, that I am nothing. You think I am invisible. But invisible people see everything. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a student ID card. It was old, scratched, and faded, but the photo was clearly her. Brianna Davis, Columbia Law School. I did not drop out because I could not hack it, she said, holding the card up to his face. I dropped out because my mother had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The tuition money went to chemo. The rent money went to hospice care. I took this job because it paid cash and offered overtime. I scrubbed your floors and ironed your shirts because I had debts that were burying me alive. I am not stupid. I am not a charity case. I am a woman who did what she had to do to keep her family alive. Julian stared at the ID card. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The anger in his eyes was replaced by confusion. He looked from the card to her face, trying to reconcile the maid he ignored with the woman standing before him. You have 2 choices right now. She continued, her voice hard. You can keep throwing a tantrum like a spoiled child. You can break every piece of furniture in this penthouse and feel sorry for yourself. You can let Vanessa win because you are too proud to accept help from the help. Or you can sit down at that table and look at what I found. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron again. This time she pulled out a large Ziploc bag. Inside was a chaotic mess of paper strips, thousands of them, thin white ribbons of shredded documents. Vanessa shreds her personal files every Friday night, she said, shaking the bag in front of him. She thinks the shredder destroys the truth. She thinks that once the paper is cut, the words are gone. But she is lazy. She uses a strip-cut shredder, not a cross-cut. Brianna walked over to the coffee table and dumped the contents of the bag onto the glass surface. It looked like a pile of confetti. I have spent the last 6 months taping these back together, she said, pointing at the pile. I started doing it because I thought she was cheating on you. I wanted to protect you, but what I found was not a love letter. It was a flight itinerary and a bank transfer authorization form that was shredded 3 weeks ago. She picked up a reassembled page held together by clear tape and patience. Sit down, Julian, she ordered, and read. Julian looked at the mountain of white paper strips on his glass coffee table. It looked like snow. It looked like nothing. But Brianna moved her hands over the pile with the precision of a surgeon. She pushed aside the loose strips and pulled forward a sheet of paper that she had painstakingly reconstructed. It was covered in clear Scotch tape. It crinkled as she smoothed it out against the glass. Look at the date, she said, pointing to the top right corner. This was printed 2 months ago, long before the investigation started, long before the indictments were even rumored. Julian leaned in. His eyes scanned the jagged lines of text. It was a flight itinerary. First class. Emirates Airlines. Departure date was today. Destination Mail Maldives. One way. She told me she was going to her mother in Connecticut. Julian whispered. He felt the room spin. She said she needed space to clear her head for the trial. She is not in Connecticut, Brianna said, her voice flat. She is on an island with no extradition treaty. But that is not the worst part. That is just the getaway car. You need to see who paid for the gas. She reached into the bag and pulled out a second document. This one was thicker. It was missing pieces. There were gaps in the text where the shredder had chewed too deep or the strips had been lost in the trash. But the header was legible, and the signature block at the bottom was perfectly intact. It was a stock transfer agreement, a private sale of equity. Julian read the bold letters at the top. Sale of preferred class A holdings, Thorne Biotech. He felt bile rise in his throat. Those were his shares, his controlling interest. He looked at the bottom of the page. Vanessa's signature was there, loopy and confident. She had power of attorney. He had given it to her 6 months ago for estate planning. She had used it to sell him out. But who did she sell to, Julian asked. Who would buy that much stock in the middle of a federal investigation? Brianna pointed to the buyer line. The name was taped together from 4 different strips of paper, but it was unmistakable. Vane Capital. Marcus Julian choked out the name. Marcus Vane. His biggest rival. The man who had tried to buy him out 3 times and failed. The man who had sworn to destroy him. She did not just steal the charity money, Brianna said quietly. She liquidated your control of the company. She sold you to the wolf and left you tied up for him to find. She got $50 million from the charity, and God knows how much from Vane for the stock. She is rich, Julian, and you are about to be homeless. Julian stared at the taped paper. The betrayal was total. It was absolute. Vanessa had not just panicked. She had planned this execution for months. She had slept in his bed while negotiating with his enemy. Why, he asked. His voice was broken. Why would she do this to me? Because you were blind, Brianna said. And Marcus Vane pays very well for blindness. The penthouse plunged into absolute darkness. The sudden absence of light was physical. It hit Julian like a blow to the chest. The gentle hum of the climate control system died. The city lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to recoil, leaving the room in a suffocating gloom. Julian stood paralyzed. His heart hammered against his ribs. What is happening? He stammered. Is it a power outage? Brianna was already on the floor. She was scrambling, gathering the taped documents she had just shown him. This is not an outage, she whispered. Her voice was tight but controlled. Someone just cut the hard line to the building. Then came the sound. It was not the wind. It was the screech of metal on metal followed by a deafening crash. The private elevator doors in the foyer had been forced open. Heavy boots stomped onto the marble floor. Not one person. Many. The sound echoed through the vast open space of the apartment like thunder. Julian felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He reached for the wall, trying to find a panel to call the doorman, but the panel was dead. He realized with a sickening jolt that he was completely exposed. Security, he whispered, his voice trembling. I need to call my security detail. But there was no security detail. The memory washed over him like a bucket of ice water. Vanessa's voice, smooth and convincing, telling him to trim the fat. The legal fees are astronomical, Julian. We need to liquidate assets. Fire the night team. You live in a fortress. You do not need them. He had signed the order himself. He had left the gate open. Voices drifted from the foyer. They were low, professional, and terrifying. Sweep the perimeter. Locate the device. Secure the target. If he resists, neutralize him. Neutralize. Julian's knees gave way. He sank to the carpet. They were mercenaries, private military contractors. They were here to wipe him out, to erase the evidence and the man who held it. Brianna grabbed his arm. Her fingers dug into his bicep. Get up, she hissed. Get up right now. I cannot. Julian gasped. He was hyperventilating. They have guns. We are dead. We are not dead yet. Brianna pulled him. She was stronger than she looked. She dragged him away from the open living area toward the shadows of the kitchen. Listen to me, Julian. They want the iPad. They want the papers, and they will burn this place down to get them. Do you want to die on your knees, or do you want to fight? A beam of blinding white light cut through the living room. It swept over the coffee table, where the documents had been just seconds ago. Clear left, a voice shouted. Living room clear. Check the master suite. Find the girl. She has the drive. They knew about her. Julian looked at Brianna with wide, terrified eyes. They were not just here for him. They were here to clean up the loose end. And the loose end was the woman holding his arm. Move, Brianna commanded. She pushed him toward the pantry. She did not panic. She did not scream. She moved with the silent efficiency of someone who had spent years making herself invisible. But this time she was not hiding to clean. She was hiding to survive. Julian stumbled after her. He heard the crash of furniture being overturned in his office, the sound of his life being torn apart. He realized in that moment of terror that his billion-dollar empire could not save him. The only thing standing between him and a bullet was the maid he had tried to fire. Brianna shoved Julian into the wine cellar and slammed the heavy oak door. She spun the locking mechanism. It clicked with a reassuring thud. The room was cool and smelled of cork and dust. Julian slid down the wall until he hit the floor. He was shaking. He looked up at the rows of vintage wine worth thousands of dollars and realized they were just glass bottles now. They were useless against men with guns. We are trapped, Julian whispered. There is no way out. They are going to cut through that door and kill us. Brianna ignored him. She was already pulling her phone out of her apron pocket. Her face was illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. She wasn't calling the police. She was opening an app. Stop crying and listen to me. She snapped her fingers, flying across the glass. You installed the Citadel smart home system 3 years ago. You spent $2 million on it. Do you remember? Julian stared at her blankly. What does that matter? They cut the power. They cut the hard line, Brianna corrected. The Citadel system runs on a backup generator and a dedicated satellite link. You would know that if you ever read the manual. But you didn't. I did. I had to learn it to let the dog walker in and adjust the thermostat for your precious orchids. She tapped the screen furiously. A schematic of the penthouse appeared. Red dots moved through the living room. The mercenaries. They were bunching up near the kitchen preparing to breach the hallway. They are right outside, Brianna murmured. Perfect. She looked at Julian, her eyes cold and calculating. You wanted a fortress, Julian. Now you are going to see what it can do. She pressed a button marked Perimeter Lockdown. In the living room, a mechanical whirring roared to life. Heavy iron security shutters slammed down over the windows and the archways leading to the foyer and the hallway. The sound was like a guillotine dropping. Screams erupted from outside the door. The mercenaries were shouting, realizing they were sealed in. What did you do? Julian gasped, scrambling to his feet. I just locked them in the kill box, Brianna said calmly. But they are still armed. We need to cool them down. She swiped to the next screen. Fire suppression. She hit execute. A deafening hiss echoed through the thick door, then the sound of rushing water. High-pressure sprinklers erupted in the living room, dousing the men in gallons of water per second. It wasn't just a drizzle. It was a deluge designed to extinguish chemical fires. Outside, chaos reigned. Men were slipping on the wet marble. They were shouting orders that were drowned out by the mechanical roar of the water. Brianna watched the red dots on her screen scatter in confusion. They cannot see, she said. The water is freezing and the pressure is disorienting them. Their comms are likely shorting out. She turned the phone toward Julian. He looked at the screen, then at her. He looked terrified, but for the first time he looked at her with something approaching awe. You control the house, he whispered. I manage the house, Mr. Thorne. Brianna replied, sliding the phone back into her pocket. There is a difference. I know where the bones are. And right now I am the only one keeping the roof from falling on your head. The banging on the wine cellar door stopped. The mercenaries were too busy trying to find an exit that wasn't sealed by iron. Brianna leaned against the wine rack and crossed her arms. We wait here, she said. The police will be here in 3 minutes. The silent alarm triggers automatically when the shutters drop. I disabled the audio warning so they wouldn't know help was coming. Julian slumped back against the wall. He looked at the woman in the gray uniform. She had just weaponized his own luxury against a hit squad. Who are you? He asked again. His voice filled with a strange mix of fear and respect. I told you, Brianna said, closing her eyes for a moment of rest. I am the help. The sirens cut through the night air like a knife. It was a high-pitched wail that grew louder with every second. Blue and red lights flashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the flooded living room in chaotic bursts of color. The mercenary leader tapped his earpiece, his face twisting in frustration. We are compromised, he shouted to his team. Abort. Move out now. They did not hesitate. They were professionals, and professionals knew when a job had gone wrong. They scrambled toward the service exit, their heavy tactical boots splashing through inches of water. They forced the manual release on the security shutters and vanished into the stairwell, just as the elevator dinged, signaling the arrival of the police. The penthouse fell silent. The only sound was the steady drip, drip, drip of water falling from the ceiling fixtures and the ragged breathing of 2 people who had just stared death in the face. Julian stepped out of the wine cellar. His legs felt like lead. He walked into the living room, and the devastation hit him. His sanctuary was destroyed. Water soaked his Italian leather sofas. It pooled around the shattered remains of his $1 million stereo system. He stood in the center of the ruins, water seeping into his expensive dress shoes. He was shivering uncontrollably. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes heavy and cold, clinging to his skin. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to stop the tremors that racked his body. He looked up and saw Brianna. She was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, completely dry. She held a clean white towel in her hands. She walked over to him, her steps measured and calm, and handed him the towel. She did not look smug. She did not look triumphant. She just looked ready for the next problem. Julian took the towel and wiped his face. He looked at her. He really looked at her. For 3 years she had been a ghost in his house, a pair of hands that tidied up his messes. Now she stood before him like a general surveying a battlefield. The shift in power was palpable. He felt small. He felt foolish. How? He whispered, his voice cracking. The Citadel system. The installers told me it was military grade. They said it required biometric authorization and complex sequence codes to activate the siege protocols. I never even set up the user profile because it was too much hassle. I told them to leave it on factory settings. How did you know how to access the subroutines? How did you know the override commands? Brianna looked him dead in the eye. Her expression was unreadable in the dim emergency lighting. Because I am the only person in this house who read the instruction manual, Julian, she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of mockery, but heavy with truth. It was sitting in the bottom drawer of your desk for 3 years. It was still wrapped in the plastic. I read it during my lunch breaks. I read it because I needed to know how to bypass the motion sensors to clean the crown molding without triggering a silent alarm. The master override code was printed on page 5. You never changed it. You never even opened the book. Julian stared at her. The shame washed over him hotter than the water from the sprinklers. He was a tech genius. He was a billionaire, and he had almost died because he was too arrogant to read a manual. He had almost lost everything because he thought he was too important for details. And the woman he had tried to fire, the woman he had called low and unskilled, had saved his life because she did the work he refused to do. He sank onto the arm of a wet sofa. He looked at the floor. He didn't know what to say. There were no words big enough to bridge the gap between who he thought he was and who he actually was in this moment. The police are coming up, Brianna said, turning toward the elevator. We need to get our story straight. We tell them it was a robbery. We do not mention Vanessa or the files yet. If the press gets wind of the missing money before we have the ring, she will disappear. We need to be smart. Julian looked up at her. He nodded slowly. For the first time, he didn't give an order. He took one. The apartment was quiet now, except for the low hum of the server rack in the closet cooling down. The police had taken their statement about a botched robbery and left a patrol car downstairs, but they had no idea the real crime was digital and happening thousands of miles away on a blockchain. Julian sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the wall of monitors Brianna had configured. He watched her work. Her eyes scanned 4 different feeds at once, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that made him dizzy. Stop looking at the money, Julian said, rubbing his temples. We know she took it. We need to find out where she put it. If she moved it to a crypto wallet, it could be anywhere. It could be on a flash drive in a safety deposit box in Zurich. It is not in Zurich, Brianna said, her voice tight with concentration. It is much closer than that. Come here. Look at this. She pointed to a monitor displaying footage from 2 weeks ago. Vanessa was sitting at the dining table. She was on her phone. She looked agitated. She tapped the screen. Then she raised her right hand and tapped a large emerald ring against the back of the phone case. A moment later, she smiled and typed something quickly. Brianna rewound the footage and played it again. Then she pulled up another clip from a month ago. Vanessa was at the wall safe in the master bedroom. She didn't punch in the code. She placed her palm flat on the panel and tapped the ring against the biometric scanner. The safe opened green. Julian leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. That ring. I gave her that ring for our engagement. It is a vintage emerald from the 20s. I bought it at auction. You bought the stone, Brianna corrected. She had the setting changed. Look at the bezel. It is too thick for a vintage mount. And look at the way she taps it. That is not a nervous tick. That is a near-field communication handshake. She pulled up a schematic on the adjacent screen. It was a diagram of a high-end biometric security device disguised as jewelry. It is a smart ring, Julian breathed. A hardware wallet. It is a Ledger Nano X, disguised as a status symbol, Brianna said. It stores private keys, passwords, 2-factor authentication codes, and it has a GPS tracker built into the ceramic core. She is wearing the $50 million on her finger, Julian. She is wearing the location history of every meeting she had with Marcus Vane. She is wearing the evidence that sends them both to prison for 20 years. Julian stared at the screen. The audacity of it was staggering. She was walking around with his fortune on her hand, waving it in his face every time she drank a glass of wine. "We have to get it," he said. "We have to steal the ring." "It is not that simple," Brianna said, leaning back in the chair. "That model has a capacitive touch sensor on the inner band. It detects skin contact and a pulse. If you take it off the finger without disarming it first, it locks down. It encrypts the data and requires a 24-word recovery seed phrase to unlock. If we steal it and trigger the lockdown, we end up with a very expensive paperweight and zero evidence." "So we are stuck," Julian said, slamming his fist into his palm. "We know where the money is, but we cannot touch it." "We are not stuck," Brianna said, turning to look at him. Her eyes were dark and serious. "We just have to be surgical. We have to get close enough to clone the signal or swap the ring while it is still active. We need to get to her while she is feeling safe, while she is celebrating." "She is at the Onyx Club tonight," Julian said. "The victory party. She invited half of Wall Street." "Then that is where we are going," Brianna said, standing up. "We are going to crash a party." The Onyx Club was not just a nightclub. It was a fortress built of black marble and gold leaf, designed to keep the world out and the elite in. On the computer screen, the live feed from the street showed a line of limousines stretching down the block. Julian paced the length of the living room, dragging his left leg slightly. The heavy plastic of the ankle monitor chafed against his skin, a constant humiliating reminder that he was a prisoner in his own home. He stopped in front of the screen, staring at the velvet ropes he used to walk past without breaking stride. "She is in there," he said, his voice tight. "She is drinking champagne that costs more than your tuition, surrounded by security that would tackle you if you even looked at the door wrong. You cannot just walk in there, Brianna. They have a biometric face scanner at the members' entrance." "I am not going through the front door," Brianna said calmly. She was standing by the kitchen island, adjusting a tiny flesh-colored earpiece she had just inserted into her right ear. "Can you hear me?" Julian put on his headset. Her voice came through crystal clear. "I hear you. But this is insanity. Even if you get in through the service entrance, the main floor is a shark tank. If you look out of place, if you hesitate for 1 second, security will drag you into a back room and I cannot come get you." "Then tell me how not to hesitate," Brianna said. She looked at him, her eyes expectant. "You have lived in this world your whole life. Teach me the rules." Julian took a deep breath. He looked at the woman who had spent 3 years making herself invisible in his house. Now he had to teach her how to be visible, but in a way that deflected suspicion. "Okay," he said, leaning toward the microphone. "Listen to me. The first rule of the Onyx is arrogance. When you walk into that room, you do not look at your feet. You do not look at the ceiling to admire the architecture. You look straight ahead. Poor people look around because they are impressed. Rich people look through things because they own them." "I can do that," Brianna said. "Walk slower," Julian commanded. "You always walk like you are rushing to finish a task. You walk like you are on the clock. Tonight you are not on the clock. You own the time. If you bump into someone, do not apologize. Do not say, 'Excuse me.' You just stop and wait for them to move. If you apologize, they will know you do not belong." Brianna nodded, absorbing the strange, twisted logic of his world. And Brianna, Julian added, his voice dropping lower. "When you get close to her, do not make eye contact. Vanessa is a predator. If you look her in the eye, she will sense fear. You look at her shoulder. You look at her drink. You look at the ring, but never the eyes. Do you understand?" "I understand," she said. She grabbed her coat. She looked different. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold determination. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an operative. "I am leaving now," she said into the mic. "Keep the line open." "I will be right here," Julian said. He watched her walk out the door. For the first time, he wasn't the one in charge. He was just the voice in her ear praying that his lessons were enough to keep her alive in the viper's nest he had helped build. Julian waited in the living room, his eyes fixed on the hallway door. He had told her to raid Vanessa's closet in the guest room. There were gowns in there worth more than a luxury car, silks and velvets that had walked the runways of Paris and Milan. He expected her to walk out looking like a debutante transformed by the armor of wealth. He expected her to look like one of them. But when the door finally opened, Julian felt a surge of panic. Brianna was not wearing a gown. She was not wearing diamonds. She was wearing a crisp, blindingly white button-down shirt, tailored black trousers, and a black vest. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, tight bun, not a stray strand in sight. She looked professional. She looked sharp. But she looked exactly like what she was: the help. "No," Julian said, shaking his head vigorously. "Absolutely not. Brianna, have you lost your mind? You are walking into the Onyx Club. The membership fee alone is $50,000. If you walk in there dressed like a waiter, security will throw you out before you even get to the coat check. You are supposed to blend in, not stand out." Brianna walked over to the mirror in the foyer. She adjusted her cuffs with a calm precision that unnerved him. She did not look like she was panicking. She looked like a soldier checking her gear. "I am blending in," she said, turning to face him. "You just do not understand how." "I understand that you look like you are about to serve hors d'oeuvres," Julian snapped. "Vanessa will see you in a second. She knows you. She has lived in the same house as you for 3 years. If she sees her maid walking around her victory party, she will scream for the police." "She won't see me," Brianna said. Her voice was steady, cutting through his anxiety. "That is the point, Julian. If I walk in there wearing a red dress, everyone will look. Men will look because I am a new face. Women will look to judge my clothes. And Vanessa will look because she is paranoid. But if I wear this—" She gestured to the black vest. "I become invisible." She took a step closer to him, her eyes intense. "It is my superpower, Julian. People like you, people like Vanessa, you are trained from birth to ignore the people who serve you. We are not humans to you. We are furniture that breathes. We are just hands holding a tray. I have poured coffee for Vanessa every morning for 1,000 days, and she has never once looked at the color of my eyes. She looks at the coffee cup. Tonight, I am not Brianna the enemy. I am just another server refilling her champagne." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a plastic ID badge attached to a lanyard. "This belongs to my friend Chloe," she explained. "She works the night shift at the Onyx. She called in sick tonight so I could take her shift. This badge gets me through the service entrance past the metal detectors and right onto the floor. No questions asked." Julian stared at her. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He thought back to all the galas, all the dinners, all the parties he had attended. Could he remember the face of a single waiter? Could he describe the person who took his coat? No. They were invisible. She was right. He had spent his life looking through people, and now she was using that blindness as a weapon. "You are terrifying," he whispered. Brianna pinned the badge to her vest. She checked her reflection one last time. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a predator in camouflage. "I am not terrifying," she said, tapping the earpiece. "I am just the one person you all forgot to fear. I am ready. Let's go steal a fortune." The heavy service door swung shut behind her, sealing out the quiet of the kitchen and trapping her inside the belly of the beast. The Onyx Club was a sensory assault. The bass thumped against Brianna's chest like a second heartbeat. The air smelled of expensive perfume, spilled champagne, and the metallic tang of raw ambition. She adjusted the heavy silver tray balanced on her left hand. It was loaded with crystal flutes filled with vintage Dom Perignon. In her right ear, Julian's voice was a steady anchor. "Turn left at the ice sculpture. Keep your head down. Do not make eye contact. You are furniture, Brianna. You are just furniture." She moved through the sea of tuxedos and designer silk. Julian was right. It was like wearing an invisibility cloak. A man in a velvet blazer bumped into her shoulder, spilling a drop of wine. He did not apologize. He did not even look at her. He just brushed the sleeve of his jacket and continued laughing. She was a ghost. "I see the VIP section," Brianna whispered into her collar. "It is on the mezzanine. Gold velvet ropes." "That is her table," Julian replied. His voice was tight. "Is she there?" Brianna climbed the short staircase. The air up here was thinner, colder. She scanned the booth, and then she froze. Vanessa was there. She was wearing a shimmering emerald dress that matched the ring on her finger. But she was not alone. Sitting next to her, his arm draped casually over the back of the booth, was Marcus Vane. "Julian," Brianna said, her voice barely audible. "She is with Marcus." There was a long silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "Of course she is, the buyer and the seller." "Get closer, Brianna. I need to hear them." Brianna stepped into the VIP area. She moved toward the table, holding out the tray of champagne. Vanessa did not look up. She was too busy laughing. It was a cruel, sharp sound. "To the man of the hour," Vanessa said, raising her glass. "Or should I say, the man of the cell block?" Marcus Vane chuckled, clinking his glass against hers. "Poor Julian. I almost feel bad for him. He really thought you loved him." "He was pathetic," Vanessa sneered. She took a sip of champagne. "He was like a puppy, Marcus, always following me around, always buying me things to prove he was worthy. He never understood that some people are born to rule and some are born to be eaten." Brianna stood frozen just inches away, filling an empty glass for a guest. Her hand was steady, but her stomach turned. Every word was a knife twisting in Julian's gut. "He will get 10 years minimum," Marcus said, leaning in. "By the time he gets out, his company will be mine, his reputation will be dust, and we will be spending his retirement fund in the Mediterranean." "He deserves it," Vanessa said. She looked at the ring on her finger. She tapped it against the glass. Tink, tink, tink. The sound echoed in Brianna's earpiece. He was too weak to hold on to his empire. "I just did him a favor and took it off his hands." In the earpiece, Brianna heard a sound that broke her heart. It was not anger. It was a sob. A single choked sound of a man realizing that his entire life had been a lie. "Julian," Brianna whispered. "Stay with me. I gave her everything." Julian's voice was a broken whisper. "I loved her." "Focus," Brianna commanded silently. She finished pouring the wine and stepped back into the shadows. She had seen the ring. She had heard the confession. Now she just had to take back what was stolen. Julian whispered in her ear. "Now, Brianna. Do it now before she leaves the table. You have one shot at this." Brianna took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and stale cigar smoke. She gripped the neck of the red wine bottle. It was a heavy vintage Cabernet, dark and thick as blood. She moved toward the booth with the calculated clumsiness of a nervous employee. Vanessa was still laughing at something Marcus had whispered, her head thrown back, exposing her long neck. Her hand, the one bearing the ring, was resting on the white tablecloth. "Excuse me, ma'am," Brianna said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "Let me top that off for you." She leaned in, intruding into Vanessa's personal space. Vanessa didn't even look at her. She just waved her glass impatiently, without breaking her conversation. This was it. Brianna waited for the beat. 1, 2. Just as Vanessa shifted her weight to reach for her clutch, Brianna let her wrist go limp. The bottle tilted too far. A heavy stream of dark red liquid cascaded down. It missed the glass completely. It splashed onto the table and poured directly onto the lap of Vanessa's shimmering emerald silk dress. The stain bloomed instantly, turning the bright green fabric into a black, sodden mess. The scream pierced the thumping bass of the club music. Vanessa jumped up her chair, screeching against the floor. "My dress! You stupid cow, look what you did! This is vintage Versace!" The entire VIP section went silent. The music seemed to stop. Every eye turned to their table. Brianna dropped the bottle on the table with a clatter and grabbed a handful of napkins, falling into the role of the terrified servant. "I am so sorry, ma'am," Brianna stammered, dabbling frantically at the wet silk. "I tripped. The floor is slippery. Please let me help you. Get away from me." Vanessa shrieked. She shoved Brianna's hands away. "You are making it worse. You filthy, incompetent idiot. Do you know how much this cost? You just ruined a $20,000 dress." She was shaking with rage. The alcohol and the adrenaline had stripped away her polished socialite mask. She raised her hand. The movement was fast fueled by pure entitlement. Crack. The sound of the slap was louder than the shout. Brianna's head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned as if she had been touched by a hot iron. The taste of copper filled her mouth where her tooth cut into her lip. A collective gasp went through the onlookers, but nobody moved. Nobody stepped in to help the server. They just watched the show. In her earpiece, Julian's voice was a roar of fury. "Did she hit you? Brianna, get out of there right now. Abort. I am coming down there." Brianna did not move. She kept her head bowed, clutching her burning cheek. She needed this. She needed the anger. She needed Vanessa to be so blinded by rage that she made a mistake. "I am sorry," Brianna whispered again, forcing tears into her voice. Vanessa grabbed her purse, her chest heaving. "You are fired. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I have to get this off me." She turned to Marcus, her eyes wild. "Order another bottle. I am going to the ladies' room to try and salvage this disaster. If this stains, I am suing the club." Vanessa stormed away, pushing past the gawking bystanders, heading straight for the restroom. Brianna watched her go. She wiped the corner of her mouth, checking for blood. "Do not come down here, Julian," Brianna said into the mic, her voice deadly calm. "I am fine. She is heading to the trap. I am going in." The ladies' room at the Onyx Club was a sanctuary of black marble and gold fixtures. It was quiet, the heavy bass of the dance floor reduced to a dull, thumping vibration in the floorboards. Vanessa stood at the sink, furiously scrubbing at the dark purple stain on her dress with a wet paper towel. She was muttering curses under her breath, her face twisted in a mask of ugly rage that the society cameras never saw. "Damn it," she hissed. "Damn him and his cheap wine." She threw the paper towel into the trash and grabbed another. The water from the automatic faucet was splashing everywhere. She stopped looking at her hand. The massive emerald ring, the one holding $50 million in encrypted data, was getting wet. She paused. For 3 years she had never taken it off in public. But she was angry, she was drunk, and she was alone in a bathroom with a clumsy server. She gripped the ring and slid it off her finger. It made a heavy, solid sound as she set it down on the cold marble counter. Clack. It sat there gleaming under the recessed lighting. The green stone seemed to pulse, a beacon of stolen wealth waiting to be claimed. Brianna stood 5 feet away, holding a stack of fresh linen towels. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it would crack a bone. This was it. The moment. The ring was exposed. The target was distracted. All she had to do was step forward, offer a towel with her left hand, and swipe the ring with her right. Julian's voice was a ghost in her ear. "Take it, Brianna. Take it and run." Brianna took a step. Her rubber-soled shoes were silent on the floor. She moved like a shadow. She reached out her hand, hovering inches from the counter. Vanessa was bent over, scrubbing, distracted. Brianna's fingers curled, ready to snatch the device. Then Vanessa looked up. She didn't look at the stain. She looked into the mirror. And in the mirror, she saw the server standing behind her. But she didn't just see a uniform. She saw the eyes. The dark, intelligent, fierce eyes that she had ignored every morning over coffee for 3 years. She saw the set of the jaw. She saw the person inside the clothes. The scrubbing stopped. The water continued to run, a steady hiss in the silence. Vanessa's eyes widened in the reflection. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, followed instantly by a dawn of terrifying recognition. You, Vanessa whispered. She spun around, her wet hands dripping onto the floor. She didn't look at the ring. She looked straight at Brianna. You are not a waiter, Vanessa said, her voice low and incredulous. She took a step back, her back pressing against the sink, blocking the ring. You are the maid. You are Brianna. Brianna froze. The element of surprise was gone. The camouflage had failed. Vanessa let out a sharp, breathless laugh. It was a sound of disbelief. You spilled the wine on purpose. You followed me here. She looked from Brianna to the ring sitting on the counter behind her and then back to Brianna. The realization hit her like a physical slap. The paranoia that had been gnawing at her all night suddenly made sense. You know, Vanessa whispered. You know about the ring? She snatched the ring off the counter, clutching it in her fist so tight her knuckles turned white. Her face hardened. The socialite vanished, replaced by the predator who had dismantled a billion-dollar company without blinking. Who sent you? She demanded, stepping forward, invading Brianna's space. Was it Julian? Is he outside? Tell me who sent you before I scream and have security break every bone in your body. Brianna didn't back down. She couldn't. She was trapped in a black marble box with the enemy, and the only way out was through. Nobody sent me, Brianna said, her voice steady. I came for what is mine, and I came for what you stole. Vanessa sneered. You are nothing. You are a dust mite. And you just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life. Vanessa did not scream. She did not call for security. She lunged. It was a feral, desperate movement that had nothing to do with her law degree or her society pedigree. Her perfectly manicured nails aimed straight for Brianna's eyes. Brianna threw her hands up just in time, catching Vanessa's wrists. The impact knocked them both backward. They slammed into the wall of mirrors, the glass shuddering under the force of their bodies. You think you can take me? Vanessa hissed, her face contorted into a mask of pure hate. You are nothing. You are a servant. She drove her knee hard into Brianna's stomach. Brianna gasped the air, leaving her lungs in a painful wheeze. Her grip loosened. That was all the opening Vanessa needed. She grabbed a handful of Brianna's hair, pulling her head back with a vicious yank. Brianna stumbled, her feet slipping on the wet floor where the water was still overflowing from the blocked sink. In her earpiece, Julian was screaming, Brianna, get out! Get out now! But his voice sounded a million miles away. Vanessa used her weight, shoving Brianna forward. She wasn't trying to hit her anymore. She was trying to kill her. She slammed Brianna's chest against the cold marble of the vanity. The breath left Brianna's body again. Before she could recover, Vanessa grabbed the back of her neck. Her grip was like iron. You want to clean, Vanessa spat. Then clean the sink. She forced Brianna's face down toward the basin. The water was rising cold and terrifying. Brianna fought, her hands scrabbling against the slick marble, trying to find purchase. But Vanessa had the leverage. She pushed down, harder. Brianna's face hit the water. The world went muffled and dark. The cold liquid rushed into her nose and mouth. She thrashed, panic flaring in her chest like a wildfire. The sound of the faucet was a roar in her ears. She could feel Vanessa's weight on top of her, pressing down, pinning her to the porcelain. Die, Vanessa whispered. Just die. Brianna's vision started to spot with black. Her lungs burned. She thought of her mother. She thought of the cancer ward. She thought of the debts. And then a surge of cold, hard rage cut through the panic. She had not survived poverty and hunger just to be drowned in a bathroom by a woman wearing a stolen fortune. She stopped thrashing. She planted her feet firmly on the tiled floor. She reached back her hand, searching blindly until her fingers found the tender skin of Vanessa's inner thigh. She pinched, hard. Vanessa shrieked and recoiled instinctively. The pressure on Brianna's neck vanished for a split second. It was enough. Brianna exploded upward. She gasped for air, water streaming down her face. She didn't pause. She spun around, using her momentum. She drove her shoulder into Vanessa's chest. It was a move she had learned in self-defense classes at the community center, a move designed to create distance. Vanessa stumbled back, her high heels skidding on the wet floor. She flailed her arms, windmilling as she tried to regain her balance. She crashed backward into the open door of the handicapped stall. Brianna didn't wait. She didn't think. She moved on instinct. She launched herself at the stall door, slamming it shut with every ounce of strength she had left. Vanessa threw her weight against the door from the inside, screaming in frustration. "Let me out! Open this door, you filth!" Brianna jammed the heavy metal latch home. Click. The sound was the sweetest thing she had ever heard. She leaned her back against the door, sliding down until she hit the floor. Her chest was heaving. Her hair was plastered to her face. She was soaking wet. But she was alive, and Vanessa was trapped. Julian's voice was frantic in her ear. "Brianna, answer me. Are you there?" Brianna coughed, spitting out water. She touched her earpiece with a shaking hand. "I am here," she rasped. "She is contained." She looked at the sink. The water was still running, and next to the sink, gleaming under the lights, was the emerald ring. Vanessa had been so busy trying to kill her that she had forgotten the one thing she needed to protect. Brianna stood up, her legs trembling. She walked over to the counter. She picked up the ring. It felt heavy. It felt cold. It felt like victory. Brianna stared at the ring in her palm. It was heavy, dense with gold, and the hidden weight of a $50 million crime. The emerald caught the light, flashing a deep, arrogant green. She could feel the faint warmth of the battery inside the ceramic core. This was it. This was Julian's life. This was the difference between a prison cell and freedom. She shoved the ring deep into the hidden pocket of her trousers, feeling it settle against her hip like a stone. She reached into her vest pocket with trembling fingers. She pulled out the decoy. It was a cheap toy she had bought at a costume shop, carefully painted with nail polish to mimic the luster of the real thing. It wasn't perfect. Under a jeweler's loupe, it would look like garbage. But sitting on a wet marble counter in a dimly lit nightclub bathroom, it looked enough like the truth to fool a desperate woman. She placed it exactly where the real ring had been, angling the stone to catch the light. The stall door rattled violently on its hinges. Vanessa was throwing her entire body weight against the metal. "Open this door. Do you hear me? I will have you killed. I will hunt you down and destroy you." Brianna ignored the threats. She heard a new sound, heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway outside. The crackle of radios. The security team. They were seconds away. She looked in the mirror. She was a disaster. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. Her white shirt was soaked through, translucent against her skin. She looked like she had been in a brawl. She couldn't walk out like this. She grabbed a stack of clean towels from the shelf and draped them over her shoulder, covering the worst of the wet fabric. She splashed cold water on her face, washing away the sweat and the fear. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart to slow down. She had to be invisible again. She had to be the victim. The bathroom door burst open. It slammed against the wall with a deafening crash. Two massive security guards in black suits filled the doorway. They looked ready for a fight, their hands hovering over their tasers. Brianna did not run. She did not flinch. She turned toward them, her eyes wide, her lip trembling. She raised a shaking hand and pointed at the locked stall. "She is crazy," Brianna gasped, injecting every ounce of panic she could muster into her voice. "She tried to drown me. She is drunk. Please, she is going to hurt herself." The guards looked at the wet floor. They heard Vanessa screaming obscenities from behind the locked door, the sound raw and unhinged. They made a quick calculation. The threat was the screaming woman in the box, not the wet, terrified server cowering by the sinks. "Secure the area," the lead guard shouted, pushing past Brianna. "Ma'am, get out of here. Go find the manager." Brianna nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." She stepped aside, pressing her back against the tiled wall as the guards rushed the stall. She slid toward the door. She didn't look back. She walked out into the hallway. "Run," Julian whispered in her ear. His voice was tight with terror. "Run, Brianna. Do not look back." She wanted to sprint. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to walk. Running attracted attention. Running meant guilt. She walked quickly but purposefully, weaving through the crowded club. The music was a physical force, the bass thumping against her ribs. She kept her head down, clutching the towels moving through the sea of dancing bodies. She passed the VIP section. She saw Marcus Vane still sitting there looking at his watch, annoyed that his date was taking so long. He didn't even glance at the soaking wet server walking past him. She pushed through the heavy service doors. The kitchen was chaos, chefs shouting orders, pans clattering. Nobody looked at her. She swiped her borrowed badge one last time. Beep! The light turned green. She pushed the back door open and stumbled into the alley. The cold night air hit her like a slap. It smelled of rain and garbage, but to Brianna it smelled like victory. She sprinted now. She ran down the wet pavement, her shoes splashing in puddles, her lungs burning. She didn't stop until she was 3 blocks away, huddled in the shadows of a closed storefront. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. She pulled it out. Under the harsh glare of a street lamp, the real ring glowed. She keyed the mic. "I have it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Julian, I have it. We won." The penthouse smelled of ozone and damp carpet. The emergency lights were still casting long, eerie shadows across the ruined living room, but Brianna did not stop to look at the destruction. She marched straight to the server closet, which was the only dry room left in the apartment. She sat down at the console and pulled the emerald ring from her pocket. It felt heavy in her hand. It was cold and hard and contained the power to destroy a life. Julian stood behind her. He was still shivering in his wet clothes, but he was not looking away. He gripped the back of her chair, his knuckles white. "Do it," he whispered. "Plug it in." Brianna placed the ring onto the NFC reader pad. She typed in the command sequence she had memorized from the manual 3 years ago. The screen flickered. A loading bar appeared, 20%, 50%, 90%. Then the words flashed in bright green text. Handshake accepted. Decryption complete. Julian let out a breath he had been holding for hours. "It worked," he said. The biometric lock didn't trigger. Brianna did not celebrate. She started opening files. Her eyes scanned the data streams pouring down the screen. "This is not just a wallet, Julian. This is a diary. The ring tracks everything. Heart rate, skin temperature, GPS location, and audio logs triggered by stress markers." "Show me this morning," Julian commanded. "Show me 9 a.m. Brianna typed in the timestamp. A map popped up on the main monitor. It showed a red dot moving through the streets of Manhattan. "She told the court she was at the St. Jude orphanage in Queens," Brianna said, pointing at the screen. "But the GPS says she was in Midtown. She stopped here, at 42 Wall Street. That is the First National Bank." Julian said, his voice hardening. "She was there for 2 hours. Brianna clicked another folder. "And here is the transfer." The ring synced with her phone when she authorized the transaction. $50 million moved to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The authorization code matches the biometrics from this ring. "We have her, Julian. This proves she stole the money." But Julian was not looking at the bank transfer. He was looking at a file marked audio. It was time-stamped right after the bank visit. "Play it," he said. Brianna hesitated. "Julian, you do not need to hear this. We have the evidence. Play it," he roared. Brianna pressed the key. The speakers crackled. Then Vanessa's voice filled the small room. It was clear and sharp. She was laughing. "It is done, Marcus. The money is clean. I just walked out of the bank." A male voice answered. It was Marcus Vane. Did he suspect anything? "Please?" Vanessa's voice sneered. "Julian is so desperate to be loved he would sign his own death warrant if I put a heart on it. I almost feel sorry for him. He really thinks I am going to marry him. I cannot wait to get on that plane and never see his pathetic face again." The audio cut off. The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the computer fans. Julian stood frozen. The last shred of doubt, the last tiny hope that maybe there was a misunderstanding had been obliterated. He looked at the screen where the waveform of her voice was still visible. His face was pale, but his eyes were dry. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. He reached out and touched the screen. He traced the line of the transfer. "She called me pathetic," he whispered. Brianna stood up. She turned to face him. She did not offer him pity. She offered him a weapon. "She called you pathetic because she thinks you are weak. She thinks you are going to roll over and die. She thinks she has already won. But she forgot one thing." "What is that?" Julian asked, looking at her. "She forgot that you have me," Brianna said, "and we have the truth. Julian straightened his spine. He buttoned his wet jacket. He looked at the ring sitting on the console. "Copy everything," he said. "Make 3 backups. Send 1 to the cloud. Put 1 on a drive. And keep the ring. We are going back to court." "But your house arrest," Brianna said. "The alarm." "Let them arrest me," Julian said, walking toward the door. "I am done hiding in my own house. I am going to look her in the eye and watch her world burn." The federal courthouse was packed to the rafters. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters stood 3 deep against the back wall, their pens poised, hungry for the final act of the tragedy of Julian Thorne. The air was thick with anticipation. They were not there to see justice. They were there to see an execution. And Vanessa Sterling was the executioner. When the double doors opened, a hush fell over the room that was so heavy it felt physical. Vanessa walked in. She did not look like a woman who had spent the previous night drinking champagne and laughing at her fiancé's destruction. She looked like a saint. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that screamed innocence. Her hair was pulled back in a modest chignon. She wore no makeup, highlighting the pale, sleepless circles under her eyes that she had carefully applied with contour powder an hour ago. She walked to the witness stand with her head bowed. She looked fragile. She looked heartbroken. She looked perfect. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the bailiff asked, holding out the Bible. "I do," Vanessa whispered. Her voice trembled just enough to make the jury lean forward. She sat down. She placed her hands on her lap. And there it was. The ring. The massive emerald sat on her finger, catching the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. It flashed green, a bright, arrogant green. Vanessa rubbed her thumb over the stone, a subconscious gesture of comfort. She believed she was touching $50 million. She believed she was touching her passport to freedom. She had no idea she was caressing a piece of painted glass and rhinestone that Brianna had bought for $12. "Ms. Sterling." The prosecutor began, his voice soft and sympathetic. "I know this is difficult for you. You were engaged to the defendant. You were his lead counsel. Why are you here today testifying against him?" Vanessa took a deep breath. She looked at the jury. She let one single perfect tear slide down her cheek. "Because I could not live with the lie anymore," she said. Her voice gained strength. "I loved Julian. I loved him with everything I had. But when I found the transfer logs, when I realized he was stealing from sick children to fund his gambling debts, I knew I had to choose. I could either be his wife, or I could be a decent human being. I chose to be decent." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. The jury looked at her with pity. They looked at Julian with disgust. Julian sat at the defense table. He was not looking at the jury. He was staring directly at Vanessa. He was staring at the ring. His face was stone cold. For the first time in the trial, he didn't look frantic. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man watching a fly land on a spiderweb. Vanessa saw his expression. For a split second, her confidence faltered. Why wasn't he crying? Why wasn't he shouting? Why was he looking at her hand like that? She shifted in her seat, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The ring flashed again. He forced me to hide the files. Vanessa continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation. He told me that if I went to the police, he would destroy my career. He said he was untouchable. He said money could buy anything, even the law. She paused for effect. She lifted her hand, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Julian. The fake emerald aimed right at his heart. But he was wrong. She declared, "Money cannot buy the truth, and today I am here to make sure he pays for every penny he stole." The courtroom erupted. The prosecutor looked triumphant. Vanessa sat back, smoothing her skirt, touching the ring one more time. She felt invincible. She was the star. She was the hero. She had played the game perfectly. She didn't know that the game had changed, and she had just walked into a trap that was about to snap her neck. The prosecutor did not just object, he practically exploded from his chair. "Your Honor, this is a farce," he shouted, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "I have tolerated this circus for 24 hours, but I draw the line here. This woman is uncredentialed, she is untrained. She is a member of the domestic staff with zero standing in the legal community. To allow her to cross-examine a witness is not just irregular, it is grounds for a mistrial. You are letting a housekeeper interrogate a senior partner of a law firm. It is an insult to the profession and an insult to this court." The judge rubbed his temples, looking like a man who regretted every decision that had led him to this moment. He looked at Brianna standing alone at the defense table. She looked small, she looked out of place, but she also looked completely unafraid. "Mr. Prosecutor, sit down," the judge grumbled. "Under the circumstances, and given the defendant's lack of counsel, I am allowing this as a pro se assistance measure. But be warned, Ms. Davis," he pointed his gavel at her like a weapon. "This is not a game. You are skating on very thin ice. If you ask one irrelevant question, if you harass the witness, or if you waste a single second of my time, I will have the bailiff remove you, and I will revoke Mr. Thorne's bail immediately. Do you understand? This is your one and only chance. Do not make me regret it." "I understand, Your Honor," Brianna said. She picked up a single file folder. She walked across the well of the courtroom. Her shoes made a soft, rhythmic clicking sound on the floor. She stopped 10 feet from the witness stand. She looked up at Vanessa. Vanessa looked down at her with a smile that was equal parts pity and amusement. She adjusted the microphone in front of her. She looked at the jury, then back at Brianna, making sure everyone saw the contrast. The successful, beautiful lawyer in cream silk versus the plain, tired maid in a cheap suit. "Well," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with sweet venom, "I must say Julian has really lowered his standards. I knew he was having financial trouble, but I didn't realize he was too broke to hire a real attorney. Tell me, Brianna, how are you paying for this legal defense? Or is this just part of your extra duties now?" The courtroom rippled with nervous laughter. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Everyone knows the rumor, Brianna. You can drop the act. We know how a girl with no degree ends up living in a penthouse. Did he promise to marry you if you got him off? Or are you just hoping that if you save him from prison, he will finally let you sleep in the master bedroom instead of just visiting it? You are not a paralegal, honey. You are a gold digger with a mop. And quite frankly, it is pathetic." Brianna stood perfectly still. The insult was designed to break her. It was designed to make her scream, to make her cry, to make her look like the unhinged, emotional woman Vanessa wanted the jury to see. But Brianna did not break. She waited. She let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. She let Vanessa's cruel words hang in the air so everyone could smell the rot inside them. "Are you finished, Ms. Sterling?" Brianna asked softly. Vanessa blinked, surprised by the lack of reaction. "Yes, I am finished." "Good," Brianna said. "Because I didn't come here to talk about my sleeping arrangements. I came here to talk about where you were yesterday morning at 9 o'clock. Brianna looked down at the podium. Her hands were shaking visibly. She shuffled a stack of papers that were mostly blank, letting one slide off and flutter to the floor. She scrambled to pick it up, bumping her head against the microphone as she stood back up. The feedback whine made the jury wince. Laughter rippled through the gallery. It was exactly what she wanted. She needed to look incompetent. She needed to look like a frightened maid way out of her depth. "I am sorry," Brianna stammered, avoiding eye contact with the jury. I am a little nervous. This is not like cleaning a kitchen." Vanessa smiled. It was the benevolent, pitying smile of a predator watching a wounded gazelle. "Take your time, dear," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "The court has been very patient with you already. We can wait while you try to formulate a sentence." Brianna took a deep breath, clutching the podium like a lifeline. She looked up at Vanessa with wide, innocent eyes. "You said you were at the St. Jude home for boys yesterday," Brianna said, her voice quiet. "You said you were there all morning, from 9 to 12. Is that right?" Vanessa nodded, leaning into the microphone. "That is correct. I was volunteering. While Julian was allegedly at home worrying about his trial, I was reading stories to orphans. It is something I do every week. It grounds me. It reminds me that there are more important things in life than money." "That sounds nice," Brianna said, sounding defeated. "And you were there the whole time. You didn't leave to get coffee. You didn't go to the bank." Vanessa laughed softly, a sound designed to charm the jury. "No, Brianna, I did not go to the bank. I was holding a 3-year-old boy named Timothy who was crying because he missed his mother. I didn't leave his side for 3 hours. I have 5 nuns who can testify to that." Brianna nodded slowly, as if accepting defeat. She looked down at her papers again, then up at Vanessa's hand. The fake emerald ring was flashing under the courtroom lights. "That is a beautiful ring," Brianna said, pointing a shaking finger. "It looks very expensive. Did Mr. Thorne buy that for you with the charity money?" Vanessa looked at the ring. She touched it protectively. She knew she had to distance herself from any sign of wealth. She had to be the humble servant of the people. "This?" Vanessa asked, holding up her hand. "Oh no. This isn't expensive. This is just costume jewelry. It is glass and paste." She looked at the jury, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "The children at the orphanage gave this to me yesterday. They made it in arts and crafts. It is probably worth $5, but to me it is priceless. I promised them I would wear it today for good luck. I haven't taken it off since they put it on my finger." Brianna looked up. The fear vanished from her face. Her hands stopped shaking. She stood up straight, her posture shifting from submissive to commanding in the blink of an eye. "You haven't taken it off," Brianna repeated, her voice suddenly clear and sharp as a razor. "You are sure about that?" "I am sure." Vanessa snapped, annoyed by the change in tone. "It has been on my finger since 9 a.m. yesterday. So if we checked the GPS history of that ring," Brianna said, locking eyes with her, "it would show that it was at the orphanage all morning. It wouldn't show that it was at the First National Bank. And it certainly wouldn't show that it is currently transmitting a signal to a server in the Cayman Islands." Vanessa froze. The smile died on her lips. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa whispered. "I am talking about the fact that you are lying," Brianna said, "and I can prove it." Brianna leaned into the microphone. Her voice was trembling no longer. It was steady. It was the voice of a woman who was holding 4 aces in a game of poker. "Ms. Sterling, let me ask you one final time for the record. Are you absolutely certain that the ring on your finger has not been removed since 9 a.m. yesterday? Not for a shower, not to wash your hands, not for a single second?" Vanessa laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. She held up her hand, flashing the fake emerald at the jury. She was enjoying this. She thought she was watching a slow-motion car crash. "For the last time, Brianna, no, I told you. The children gave it to me. It is a symbol of my commitment to them. I have not taken it off. I would never take it off. It has been on my skin every moment." Brianna smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the hunter seeing the trap snap shut. "Thank you, Ms. Sterling. That is all I needed to hear. You have just testified under oath that the object on your finger is the same object that was on your finger 24 hours ago. Brianna turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense has no further questions for the witness. However, we do have a demonstration. I would like to request permission to cast a live feed to the courtroom monitors. The prosecutor stood up instantly. Objection. A live feed of what? More hearsay, more fairy tales about cleaning supplies. We have indulged this fantasy long enough. Brianna ignored him. She looked straight at the judge. Not hearsay, Your Honor. Data. Hard, irrefutable biometric data. I would like to connect to the Citadel smart home server located in the penthouse of Julian Thorne. The judge narrowed his eyes. He looked at Julian, who was sitting perfectly still, and then at Brianna. He was intrigued. He had seen many things in his court, but he had never seen a maid try to hack a server in the middle of a cross-examination. I will allow it, the judge said. But Ms. Davis, if this is not relevant, I will hold you in contempt. Brianna pulled a tablet from her bag. She didn't look like a maid anymore. She looked like a technician. She tapped the screen. The massive monitors on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The room dimmed slightly as the screens glowed blue. A logo appeared. Citadel Security Systems. Vanessa looked at the screen, then at Brianna. A tiny crack appeared in her perfect mask. She shifted in her seat. What is this? She demanded. What are you doing? Brianna looked at her. I am doing my job, Vanessa. I am cleaning up the mess. She tapped the tablet again. A map of the world appeared on the screen. A single bright green dot was pulsing. You said that ring has been on your finger all day, Brianna said, her voice echoing in the silent room. You said it was a gift from orphans. You said it was made of glass. Vanessa swallowed hard. Yes, that is what I said. Then please explain to the jury, Brianna said, pointing at the giant screen. Why that ring is currently broadcasting a GPS signal from the coordinates of the First National Bank of the Cayman Islands. The room erupted. Vanessa looked down at her hand. She looked at the ring. The fake emerald sparkled innocently back at her. But on the screen, the green dot was moving. It was tracking a history, and it was showing the world exactly where she had been. Here is the detailed English content for Section 26, The Technological Twist, written specifically for an AI voice reader with high tension and dramatic pacing. Brianna reached into the pocket of her blazer. Her movement was slow and deliberate. The entire courtroom watched her hand. She pulled out a small object and held it up to the light. It was an emerald ring, but this one was different. It did not sparkle with the cheap glitter of glass. It glowed with a deep, hypnotic green fire. It looked heavy. It looked ancient. It looked like power. You are right about one thing, Vanessa, Brianna said, her voice ringing clear in the silent room. The ring on your finger is a toy. It is a $12 prop I bought at a costume shop. You were so desperate to hide your guilt that you didn't even notice you were wearing plastic. Vanessa looked down at her hand. Her eyes widened in horror. She rubbed her thumb over the stone on her finger. For the first time, she felt the cheap ridge of the molding. She felt the lightness of it. She clawed at it, trying to pull it off, but her hands were shaking too hard. This, Brianna said, holding the real ring higher, is the evidence, and unlike you, it cannot lie. Brianna turned to the large monitor. Execute the handshake, she commanded. The screen flickered. A complex code scrolled down rapidly in green text. Then the map expanded. It was a satellite view of New York City. A bright red line traced a path through the streets. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Brianna narrated, pointing at the screen. You are looking at the real-time location history stored in the ceramic core of this smart ring. This data is immutable. It is written onto the blockchain every 10 seconds. The red line on the map did not go to Queens. It did not go to the St. Jude orphanage. It went straight to the financial district. It stopped at a specific building on Wall Street. At 9 a.m. yesterday morning, the witness testified she was comforting a crying child, Brianna said. But the ring tells a different story. The ring puts her exactly here, at the private wealth division of the First National Bank. The map zoomed in further. A digital timestamp appeared next to the location, 9:03 a.m. And this is where it gets interesting, Brianna continued. She turned to Vanessa, who was now pale as a sheet, gripping the edge of the witness stand. The ring is not just a tracker, it is a digital key. When Vanessa entered the bank vault, she tapped this ring against the terminal to authorize a transaction. The screen shifted again. A bank transfer authorization form appeared. It was redacted, but the amount was visible in bold black letters. $50 million. And the destination account was listed clearly. Cayman Islands Offshore Holdings. You were not at an orphanage, Vanessa. Brianna said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You were robbing Julian blind. And you used the engagement ring he gave you to sign the check. The courtroom exploded. Jurors were gasping, pointing at the screen. The judge was banging his gavel, but nobody could hear him over the noise. Vanessa stared at the screen. The red dot on the map was like a laser sight pointed at her head. The fake ring on her finger felt like it was burning her skin. She had been caught. Not by a lawyer, not by a detective, but by the technology she wore on her own hand and the maid she had underestimated. Vanessa stood gripping the wooden railing of the witness stand. Her knuckles were white. Her face was a mask of sheer panic, but she was still fighting. She opened her mouth to speak, her voice shrill and desperate. This proves nothing. So I went to the bank. That is not a crime. I was handling Julian's finances. I was trying to save his estate from bankruptcy. That GPS data does not prove theft. It just proves I was doing my job. You are twisting everything. Brianna did not look up from the tablet. She was swiping through the file directory, her movements calm and methodical. She was not arguing. She was preparing the final nail in the coffin. You are right, Vanessa, Brianna said, her voice amplifying through the courtroom speakers. Location data is circumstantial. Maybe you were at the bank to make a deposit. Maybe you were there to save the day. But technology does not just track where we go. It tracks how we feel. Brianna looked up then. She locked eyes with Vanessa. The ring has a safety feature called the panic protocol. Brianna explained, addressing the jury. It is designed to record audio automatically if the wearer's heart rate exceeds 120 beats per minute. It is meant to capture evidence during a kidnapping or an assault. But yesterday morning at 9:05 a.m., nobody was attacking you, Vanessa. You were just excited. You were experiencing the adrenaline rush of a lifetime. Vanessa's eyes went wide. She lunged for the microphone. Do not let her play that. This is a violation of my privacy. I did not consent to be recorded. The judge slammed his gavel. Sit down, Ms. Sterling. The witness will remain silent. Ms. Davis, proceed with the evidence. Brianna pressed the play button. A burst of static filled the courtroom. Then the sound of a heavy metal door closing. Then breathing. Fast, shallow breathing. And then a voice. It was not the soft, curated voice Vanessa used in court. It was sharp, fast, and dripping with arrogance. I cannot believe how easy it was. The voice on the recording laughed. It was unmistakable. It was Vanessa. A male voice mumbled in the background. It sounded like a bank teller. The transfer is confirmed, Ms. Sterling. $50 million to the Cayman account. Good, Vanessa's voice replied. It was loud and clear, echoing off the high ceilings of the courtroom. Get me the receipt. I want to be out of here before the market opens. Those stupid police are focused on the charity ledgers. They are looking for pennies while I am walking out with the vault. The recording continued, the sound of heels clicking on marble. Julian is finished, Vanessa said on the tape. By the time he realizes the money is gone, I will be on a beach, and he will be in a cage. The man is so pathetic, he actually thanked me for handling his accounts. He thanked me for robbing him. Brianna hit pause. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. The jury stared at Vanessa with open mouths. The prosecutor had his head in his hands. Julian sat at the defense table, his eyes closed, letting the truth wash over him. Vanessa stood frozen. She looked like a statue that was beginning to crack. She looked at the jury, then at the judge, then at the exit. There was nowhere to go. The voice was hers. The words were hers. The malice was hers. That is a deep fake. She shrieked, her voice breaking into a sob. She manipulated it with AI. That is not me. Brianna lowered the tablet. She looked at the woman who had tormented her, who had belittled her, who had tried to destroy the man she loved. It is not AI, Vanessa, Brianna said softly. It is the sound of your heart beating, and it just told the world exactly who you are. Vanessa looked down at her hand. The courtroom lights were unforgiving. They drilled down onto the object she had been protecting with her life. She rubbed her thumb over the large emerald stone. It felt sticky. She looked closer. A smear of bright green paint had transferred onto the pad of her thumb. Beneath the paint, the stone was not deep and verdant. It was clear. It was dull. It was plastic. She scratched at it frantically. Flakes of green varnish peeled away like dead skin, revealing the cheap resin underneath. It was a toy. It was a piece of garbage. And she had worn it into a federal court. She had sworn on it. She had testified about it. She had practically waved it in the face of the judge. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. She had not just been caught. She had been humiliated. She had been played. And the person who had played her was standing 10 feet away, wearing a cheap suit and a calm expression. The maid. The servant. The nobody. A sound ripped out of Vanessa's throat. It was not a word. It was a primal scream of pure, unadulterated rage. It shattered the decorum of the court. "You!" Vanessa shrieked. "You dirty little rat!" She didn't think. She didn't care about the judge or the jury or the cameras. She launched herself from the witness stand. She flew over the wooden railing, her expensive cream suit blurring as she moved. Her hands were clawed, hooked, ready to tear the eyes out of the woman who had ruined her. Brianna did not flinch. She did not step back. She stood her ground, watching the woman unravel. But Vanessa never reached her. 2 federal marshals were on her in a second. They tackled her mid-air. They slammed her into the floor with a bone-jarring thud. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but it didn't stop the screaming. She thrashed against the carpet, kicking and biting, spitting venom at anyone who came near. "Get off me!" she howled. "Do you know who I am? I will ruin you. I will sue every single one of you." In the back of the gallery, another figure was moving. Marcus Vane had seen enough. The moment the recording played, he knew the game was over. He stood up quietly, buttoning his jacket, trying to blend into the crowd of shocked spectators. He turned toward the double doors, keeping his head down, his eyes fixed on the exit sign. If he could just get to his private jet, he could be in non-extradition airspace by dinner. He pushed the heavy door open. "Going somewhere, Mr. Vane?" a deep voice asked. Marcus looked up. Blocking the doorway were 3 FBI agents. They were not smiling. One of them held up a pair of handcuffs. "Marcus Vane," the agent said. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." Marcus looked back at the chaotic courtroom. He saw Vanessa being hauled to her feet, her hair wild, her face smeared with mascara and sweat. He looked at Julian, who was watching him with a cold, satisfied smile. Marcus sagged. His shoulders dropped. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a scared old man in an expensive suit. "I want my lawyer," Marcus whispered as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. Back in the well of the court, the marshals had finally subdued Vanessa. They pulled her arms behind her back. The fake ring slipped from her finger. It bounced on the carpet and rolled away, coming to a stop at Brianna's feet. Brianna looked down at the piece of plastic. Then she looked up at Vanessa. "It is over, Vanessa," Brianna said quietly. Vanessa was sobbing now, great heaving breaths that racked her body. She looked at Julian. She looked at the man she had destroyed and then underestimated. "Julian, please," she begged. Tell them. Tell them it was a mistake." Julian stood up. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the woman he had once planned to marry. "It was a mistake," Julian said. "Loving you was the biggest mistake of my life, but I fixed it." "Take her away," the judge ordered. The doors opened. The press cameras flashed like lightning. Vanessa Sterling and Marcus Vane were marched out in chains, leaving behind a silent, stunned courtroom and the two people who had brought them down. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. Bang, bang, bang. The sound echoed off the wood paneling, cutting through the chaos of the courtroom like a knife. The murmurs of the gallery died instantly. The reporters stopped shouting. The flashbulbs stopped popping. All eyes turned to the high bench where the federal judge sat. His face was a mask of thunderous fury. He was not looking at the gallery. He was looking at the woman in handcuffs and the man standing by the exit surrounded by agents. "Order," the judge roared. "Order in this court." He took a deep breath, composing himself. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Julian Thorne. Julian stood slowly. His legs felt weak not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming rush of adrenaline leaving his body. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. "Mr. Thorne," the judge began, his voice dropping to a grave, authoritative baritone. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many things. I have seen greed. I have seen deception. But I have never seen a conspiracy this brazen, this calculated, and this cruel enacted within the walls of my courtroom. You were brought here today to be sentenced for crimes you did not commit. You were framed by the very people you trusted to defend you." The judge shifted his gaze to the prosecutor. The prosecution's case was built on poisoned fruit, the judge declared. Based on the digital evidence provided by the defense, specifically the undeniable biometric and geolocation data from the device Ms. Sterling so foolishly wore into this building, it is clear that the funds were stolen by Vanessa Sterling and Marcus Vane. He banged the gavel once. A sharp final sound. "All charges against Julian Thorne are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The court apologizes to you, Mr. Thorne, for this miscarriage of justice. You are a free man. Your bail conditions are revoked immediately. You may go." Julian let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He slumped forward slightly, his forehead touching the cool wood of the defense table. It was over. The nightmare was over. The judge was not finished. He turned his eyes to the marshals holding Vanessa. "As for you, Ms. Sterling, and you, Mr. Vane, you thought you could use this court as a weapon to destroy an innocent man. You committed perjury, you committed wire fraud, you committed grand larceny, and you did it with a level of arrogance that turns my stomach." Vanessa looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She looked small, she looked young, she looked terrified. "Vanessa Sterling and Marcus Vane, you are hereby remanded to federal custody immediately," the judge ordered. "Bail is denied. Given the assets you have stolen and the private aircraft Mr. Vane has access to, you are both considered extreme flight risks. You will remain in holding until your arraignment on these new charges. Get them out of my sight." Two marshals hauled Vanessa to her feet. She didn't fight this time. She didn't scream. She looked over her shoulder as they dragged her toward the side door. She looked for Julian. She wanted him to save her. She wanted him to be the soft, easy man she had manipulated for years. But Julian was not looking at her. He was looking at the woman standing next to him. Brianna was packing up the tablet. She was calm. She was professional. She was gathering the evidence that had saved his life. Julian reached out and placed his hand over hers. Brianna stopped. She looked up at him. "Thank you," Julian whispered. The marshals pushed Vanessa through the heavy door. The metal clang of it closing was the period at the end of the sentence. Marcus Vane followed, his head bowed, his empire crumbling around him. The courtroom erupted into noise again, but Julian didn't hear it. He just looked at his maid, his savior, his partner. "Let's go home," Brianna said softly. Julian nodded. "Yes, let's go home." The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung open and the world exploded into noise and light. It was a physical wall of sound. Hundreds of reporters were crammed onto the concrete steps. Satellite trucks lined the street, their dishes pointed at the sky like hungry metal flowers. The moment Brianna stepped out, the shouting began. It was a chaotic roar of questions. "Ms. Davis, over here." Brianna looked at the camera. "How did you know about the ring? Are you going to law school?" Julian stepped out beside her. Usually the cameras were for him. He was the billionaire. He was the headline. He raised his hand prepared to give the standard statement his PR team had drafted in the car. But nobody was looking at him. The microphones were not thrust in his face. They were pushed past him, aiming directly at the woman in the cheap gray suit standing in his shadow. They did not want the billionaire. They wanted the maid who had taken down a titan. Julian lowered his hand. A small, proud smile touched his lips. He stepped back. He placed a gentle hand on Brianna's shoulder and nudged her forward. "This is your moment," he whispered. "Take it." Brianna blinked against the flashbulbs. She looked at the sea of faces. She had spent 3 years trying to be invisible. She had spent 3 years walking into rooms backwards so she wouldn't disturb the air. Now the entire world was watching her. She took a deep breath. She did not shrink. She walked to the cluster of microphones. Ms. Davis, a reporter from CNN, shouted, "You just outsmarted one of the most expensive legal teams in New York. You found evidence the FBI missed. How does it feel to be a hero?" Brianna leaned into the microphones. Her voice was steady. It did not shake. "I am not a hero," she said. "I am a person who pays attention." The crowd quieted down. They hung on her every word. "People are calling this a miracle," Brianna continued. "They are saying it is amazing that a domestic worker could solve a federal crime. But that is the problem, isn't it? It should not be amazing. It should not take a miracle to find the truth." She looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. Her eyes were fierce. "I was able to save Mr. Thorne because I was close enough to see the truth. But if Julian was not a billionaire, if he did not have a smart home system and a private legal defense fund, he would be in a cell right now. The system was ready to bury him because the lie was told by someone wearing an expensive suit." She paused, letting the words sink in. Justice should not be a luxury item. The truth should not cost $50 million to prove. There are thousands of people in this city right now who are innocent, but they do not have a maid who knows how to hack a smart ring. They just have the truth. And in this system, the truth is rarely enough. We need to do better. We need to stop looking at the clothes and start looking at the evidence. Julian watched her from the side. He felt a lump form in his throat. He had employed her for 3 years, but he had never really known her. He had seen her clear dishes and fold laundry, but he had never seen her fire. He realized in that moment that she was more than just intelligent. She was magnificent. She possessed a dignity that his money could never buy. "Ms. Davis," another reporter yelled, "what is next for you? Are you going back to work for Mr. Thorne?" Brianna turned to look at Julian. Their eyes met across the crush of reporters. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade away. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not the look of a boss looking at an employee. It was the look of a man looking at his equal. "I do not know," Brianna answered, turning back to the press. "But I think I am done wearing the uniform." She turned and walked down the steps. The reporters parted for her like the Red Sea. Julian followed her. He didn't lead the way to the waiting car. He walked beside her, step for step, side by side. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the penthouse. It was exactly as they had left it. The wet carpet squelched under their feet. The shattered remains of the stereo system lay in a heap of chrome and wire. The smell of stale water and ozone hung in the air. But for the first time in months, the apartment did not feel like a prison. It felt like a blank canvas. Julian walked to the center of the room. He stopped and looked around at the ruin of his life. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the air of a free man. He turned to look at Brianna. She was standing by the kitchen island. Her instinct was kicking in. She was already reaching for a towel to start wiping up the water on the counter. "Stop," Julian said. His voice was gentle but firm. Brianna froze. She looked at him confused. "I am just cleaning up the mess, Julian. It will stain the marble if I do not dry it." "Leave it," Julian said, walking toward her. "Let it stain. I do not care about the marble. I do not care about the rug. I do not want you to lift a finger in this house ever again, not unless you want to." He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out two things. One was a personal checkbook. The other was a thick document bound in a blue legal folder. He placed them on the wet counter between them. He opened the checkbook. He took a pen and signed his name at the bottom. He did not write a number. He tore the check out and slid it across the marble toward her. "This is for you," he said. "It is blank. Write any number you want. 1,000,000, 5,000,000. It does not matter. It is yours. It is back pay for saving my life. It is back pay for every time I ignored you and every time I disrespected you." Brianna looked at the check. Her hands trembled slightly. She did not pick it up. She looked at the blue folder. "What is that?" she asked. "That is your future," Julian said. He opened the folder. It was an employment contract. The text was dense, but the title at the top was clear. Chief Legal Counsel, Thorne Biotech. Brianna read the words. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. "Julian, I cannot sign this. I am not a lawyer. I dropped out. I have no degree. I have no license." "Not yet," Julian said. He moved closer to her. "I spoke to the dean of Columbia Law School on the ride over here. I made a donation, a very large donation. You are re-enrolled, effective immediately. Your tuition is paid. Your mother's medical bills are covered. You are going to finish your degree, Brianna. You are going to graduate top of your class just like you were supposed to. And when you walk across that stage, this job will be waiting for you." Brianna felt tears prick her eyes. She shook her head slowly. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because I was blind," Julian said softly. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I spent my whole life surrounded by people who told me what I wanted to hear. People who saw my money and not the man. Vanessa looked at me and saw a target. You looked at me and saw a human being. Even when I was at my worst. Even when I was throwing things and screaming. You saw me." He reached out and hesitated for a moment before gently covering her hand with his. His skin was warm. "You are the smartest person I have ever met," Julian confessed. "You saved me when I could not save myself. I do not want to run this company without you. And if I am being honest, I do not want to live in this big empty house without you either. I need a partner, Brianna. I need someone who reads the instruction manual." He looked deep into her eyes. The arrogance was gone. The billionaire facade was gone. There was just a man asking for a chance. "Please take it," he said. "Please say yes." Brianna looked at the blank check shimmering on the wet marble counter. It was freedom. It was a life without worry. It was a private island in the Caribbean. It was everything she had spent her nights praying for while she scrubbed his floors on her hands and knees. She reached out with a hand that was steady and sure. She placed her fingertips on the paper, and then she slid it back across the cold stone toward him. "I cannot take this, Julian," she said softly. Her voice was not angry. It was just final. Julian blinked. He looked at the check, then at her. He looked confused. "It is too much. I can write a smaller amount." "It is not about the amount," Brianna said. She picked up the thick blue employment contract. She ran her hand over the gold-embossed logo of Thorne Biotech. She closed the folder gently and placed it on top of the rejected check. I cannot work for you either, she continued. If I take your money, or if I take this job, I am still just the help. I am still the person you saved. I need to be the person who saves herself. She walked over to her old worn duffel bag sitting by the door. She picked it up. It looked out of place in the luxury penthouse, but Brianna carried it like it was made of Louis Vuitton leather. I will accept the tuition, she said, turning back to him. Call it a loan, call it an investment. But when I graduate, I am not coming to work in your glass tower. Thorne Biotech has armies of lawyers in $3,000 suits. They will listen to you now because you are winning. You do not need me. She took a step closer to the elevator, her eyes burning with a new purpose. But there are people who do need me. There are housekeepers who get fired because they have to care for a sick child. There are drivers who work 80 hours a week and get stiffed on their overtime. There are invisible people all over this city who get crushed by people like Vanessa every single day. They do not have a voice. They do not have a champion. She smiled, and it was the brightest thing in the room. I am going to open my own firm, Julian. I am going to put my name on the door, and I am going to fight for them. I am going to make sure that the people who clean the messes never get treated like trash again. She pressed the call button for the elevator. The light dinged softly. The doors slid open, waiting to take her down to the street, down to the real world where she belonged. She stepped inside and turned around to face him one last time. She adjusted the strap of her bag. Her chin was high. And Julian. She added a mischievous glint in her eyes. If you ever get into trouble again, if you ever sign a paper you did not read or trust the wrong person, you can call my office, make an appointment with my secretary, but I am warning you now, my billable hours are going to be very expensive. The doors began to close. Julian stood alone in the center of his vast empty penthouse. He looked at the blank check sitting useless on the counter. He looked at the contract she had refused. A smile spread across his face. It was a smile of genuine admiration. He realized then that he had tried to buy a woman who was priceless. He had tried to hire a force of nature. He watched the numbers above the elevator count down. Goodbye, Brianna. He whispered to the empty room. He tore the check in half and let the pieces fall to the floor. He was alone, but for the first time he wasn't lonely. He knew she was out there, and he knew the world was about to change. The most profound lesson we take away from the story of Julian and Brianna is that we should never judge a book by its cover or a person by their uniform. In a world that is obsessed with status and wealth, it is easy to fall into the trap of believing that power only belongs to those who sit in the corner office or wear the expensive suits. Vanessa Sterling and Marcus Vane believed this. They thought that because they had money and influence they were untouchable. They looked at Brianna and saw nothing but a gray dress and a tray of cleaning supplies. That arrogance was their downfall. They failed to realize that the people we often treat as invisible are the ones who see everything. Brianna did not save Julian with a $1 billion bank account or a team of high-powered attorneys. She saved him with the things that cost nothing but effort. She saved him by paying attention. She saved him by reading the instruction manual that everyone else was too lazy to open. She saved him by noticing the nervous tick of a tapping ring. This story reminds us that true intelligence is not about where you went to school or how much money you make. It is about curiosity. It is about resilience. It is about the willingness to do the work that others refuse to do. Furthermore, Brianna teaches us a powerful lesson about self-worth. At the end of the story, she is offered a blank check. She is offered the easy way out. She could have taken Julian's money and lived a life of luxury, but she refused. She understood that true dignity cannot be bought. She did not want to be a rich man's charity case. She wanted to be her own hero. She chose the hard road of building her own firm and fighting her own battles because she knew that success means nothing if you do not earn it on your own terms. So the next time you walk past a janitor, a server, or a driver, take a moment to really see them. Do not look through them. Respect them. Because you never know who is hiding behind the uniform. You never know who is holding the keys to the truth. In the end, the person you underestimate today might be the only person capable of saving you tomorrow. If you believe that true strength comes from character and not a bank account, leave a heart in the comments and share this story to inspire a friend today.